So good morning, everyone. My name is Dominique Roland, and I will briefly introduce the agenda of the conference. So we are restarting after the coffee break with our first panel that will be talking about what we have achieved so far. Then we have a lunch break. You have the agenda, by the way, in the small folder that was distributed on the table. This afternoon, we'll continue with the second panel and talk about more affordable and modern aircraft. After the coffee break, we'll finish with the third panel, Innovative Technologies in General Aviation. I remind you that we are kindly invited to a dinner this evening by our guest. So the information is in the folder as well. Don't forget to take with you the invitation card, which is also provided in the folder. And tomorrow we'll restart tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock with panel 4, sharing the airspace. Continue with new business model in general aviation. And finally, the last panel will be a new vision for GA and the GA Roadmap 2.0. At the end of each panel discussion, you have the opportunity to ask questions. For that, we propose to use a Slido. Slido is an application. You have the explanation here as well as in the folder. So you can connect to the wireless system of the hotel. This is EASA Marriott, and the password is EASA 2018. So you can connect to the wireless, and then you have to go to this address, www.slido.com, and insert code EASA. We have people taking care of recording the question. The most interesting question will be displayed on screen and will be answered by the panelists. So I give the floor to Seager, who will present you in detail panel 1. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first panel, which, as you can see, is what we have achieved so far, or what they have achieved so far. As a moderator, I have no responsibility to achieve a great deal, which is a fantastic position to be in. It's kind of like a mid-term, end-of-term report, I guess, and we're lucky to be joined. The panel, for those of you who don't know, is kind of split. We have Boudewijn from EASA, Jyrki from the Commission. We have Michael and Tony representing the National Aviation Authorities, so where the regulations obviously then filtered down to, sometimes in not quite the same way everywhere. And then we have Michael and Julian representing, I guess, users of those regulations, really. So the format will be, the presentations will last about an hour, and after that hour, there'll be an opportunity for questions. As Dominique said, the questions will be hopefully there will be some questions, and hopefully there'll be questions and not statements. Having sat where you're all sitting many times, there's nothing worse than having a burning question and someone brings up a question that relates to their one aircraft, of which there's only one in the world, in their one airport, and we then managed to get a very interesting conversation for 15 minutes, which is not relevant to very many people. So you can ask a question on here, and you can vote whether the question, so hopefully that way we'll get the best questions. That should last about half an hour, after which we'll have a quick summing up. I'm also aware that this panel is the only thing that stands between all of us and lunch, so I'm going to get on with it and hand over to Boudewijn. Thank you.
Well, Ian, thank you for starting this panel. It's a tremendous challenge after the opening speech from Andreas Bosberg to do something entertaining to you and then kill the conference with a rulemaking panel. I'm the project manager of the GA Roadmap in EASA, but also a rulemaking officer. So I have two hats. Well, maybe I even wear more than two hats in real life. And I'm very thrilled to have this panel here, which is more or less the task force of the GA Roadmap. We have regular meetings where we have the chairs of a number of subcommittees combining. So we have our stakeholders, 2 chairs over here, sitting in the chair, yes. We have 2 NAA representatives in our task force. And actually, Dominique, who did the kind introduction, is part of our team, and so is Astrid, who is the organizer with our communication department of this great event. So we have a kind of a normal organization structure in here. And I'm here with Jyrki, so we thought it would be a good opportunity to tell you about what the regulators, and that is EASA and the Commission, do in this respect, and then show also what the other players do. So Jyrki, colleague, counterpart, enemy, in our rulemaking process, we are trying to give you a flavor of what we have been doing since Rome. I used a slide which is nearly the same as the slide we had in Rome. The only thing we changed actually is our office. The rest is still the same. And it's still the same message that is important here, is that we have to cooperate. And that's why I also said on the first slide what we have achieved so far. It's not EASA, it's not the Commission, it's not you, it's all together. And it's very important to understand that in the process, and that was different from in the times of Rome, we have a lot of participation and active roles in the process. We have had stakeholders, as we call it, drafting proposals for rules. And they've been involved really from the start. You now also know how difficult it is to draft a rule. That is the nice side effect of that. And the only way how we can achieve success now and in the future is to continue in this cooperation process. So that's the important message in our talk. These are the 6 objectives from the Rome conference, where we said, okay, as Patrick announced or mentioned in his opening words, IFR flying was one of the issues where we saw a big difference in the safety statistics between Europe and the US. So that was one of our main issues. Training, we'll get back to that, is certainly something we can, if you like ticking boxes, you can do that right now. Training is, we published that rule, that is available. Technology, well, if you look at the applications that we get today, I would tick that box. Simpler certification, cross, we're not there yet. Industry standards, definitely something that we're doing. But let's move to a picture, and I tried to keep it simple, of, Andre, how did you do that? It works. I created a kind of a high-level overview of all the rulemaking activities that we have done. I've been slightly optimistic. I colored green where I believe that we have completed the task. Amber is something that is still ongoing, not completed yet. Red is something that we are really at the early stage. And in blue is actually what we didn't anticipate to do at all. Because initially the GA Roadmap was really a list of rulemaking activities. But during the process, we discovered that actually changing the rules is not sufficient to make a difference. So the blue dots are other initiatives that we started during the GA Roadmap process. We will go through the different rulemaking activities, take turns in what we explain and what we have achieved so far. You want to do something on flying? Okay.
Thanks, Boudewijn. So I'm Jyrki Paajanen. I'm the other half of this bureaucrat's corner of this presentation, basically. And before I go to what I actually dubbed the chemical L picture, because it looks like something from my chemistry book back at school, I'd like to go a little bit back on why we ended up here, basically. And like Elizabeth Landricht has said in the beginning, one of the big things, perhaps the biggest thing which has happened now is the change of attitudes. And attitudes amongst the regulators. If I'm feeling too good about myself, I go to one of the aviation forums and look at what people say about us. So the attitudes haven't always changed, but at least we think we've changed. Basically, until about 2010, 11, 12, we, from the regulator's side, most of the time took the viewpoint that, yes, general aviation is different, and it needs to be treated differently. But the way we treat it differently is we take the rules we created for commercial air transport and we whittle them down a little bit to something which we think is proportionate. And then GA people should be happy and thankful for that. Weirdly enough, they weren't. And I don't understand these unthankful people, but then again, I used to be one of them. Kind of still am. Then about 2012, the member states, in their infinite wisdom in the EASA Management Board, created the GA Roadmap Group. And that was chaired by the French DGAC, and we had UK CAA there. We had Europe Air Sports and IAOPA as well there, as well as Commission, myself, and EASA, of course. And basically that group accepted that the system we had then was not fit for purpose. And there's several things which came out of there and which were then squeezed into what we call the GA Roadmap, which was approved in December 2012. But for me, there's two big things, really. Well, the biggest one is what was largely a Europe Air Sports product, was the Europe Air Sports came up with the idea of a risk hierarchy. The idea that, yes, the regulator needs to give a regulatory protection to people, but that protection level should be different depending on what the understanding of the person is about the risks they're getting involved with and what ability they have to influence them. That way, the person who goes on a weekend trip on Ryanair can't be really expected to understand anything about the risks or influence them, apart from maybe not buying the ticket at all. On the other end of the spectrum, the GA pilot is supposed to have been trained to understand the risks and take the mitigating measures. So they should be allowed to have a bit more responsibility for them. Also, with the responsibility comes the freedom. The other thing we realized was kind of that, yes, there were accidents kept happening. And of course, everybody always says safety is primary. But the trouble was that most of the ways pilots found to kill themselves were already forbidden. And no matter how much we forbade them to kill themselves, they still insisted on going and killing themselves. And I think that's kind of unfair, because it's hard to prosecute someone who's dead, but okay, whatever. So we kind of came to the realization that we'd, for decades, kept throwing regulation at every problem we encountered. Every accident we had, we thought there's a gap somewhere to be filled by a new regulation. And it got to the point where pilots just couldn't care less. There were so many rules, they were felt to be nonsensical. Now, those rules were written by Winkler, of course, so they were not nonsensical, there were good intentions behind them. But it got to the point where people just couldn't handle it anymore. So we realized we needed a new approach, which was about safety promotion as well as regulation. And it was also about enabling people to be better at analyzing the situation in which they are, which quite often meant being more experienced and more current. In other words, if you encourage people to fly more, they're probably going to be safer pilots. But then, of course, since we're regulators, we had to do a lot of regulating. That was the main thing of the first part of the GA roadmap, and we were told to fix all those rules we'd gotten wrong. And there's quite a few. And since Boudewijn is responsible for those, he'll start off with at least.
Yeah, well, I'm not responsible for drafting all the rules. I'm happy that a lot of you have joined us to do so, but I'd like to go through a number of topics that we have changed over time. And one of the examples where Jyrki said our rules are too complex and too difficult to understand, I think we have two examples on this slide that really show how it can be done differently, which is the balloon rule book and the glider rule book. We decided to extract all the operational rules out of a huge package of paper into separate books in order to have this specific community getting access to that information. So, and apart from taking all that information out, we also simplified it. It has been a learning curve for all of us at EASA, but also, I think, on your side, the people who drafted these rules. that finding the right balance is difficult, but I think we have achieved a lot. The balloon rulebook, the operational side is available. The glider rulebook, for your information, the proposal was voted last week or the week before, if I'm right. So the member states are now giving a positive okay to our proposal. It's not there yet, but it's coming. And the idea will be that in those dedicated rule books, the balloonists will find their rules for operating, but also for licensing in the future, and we can expand if we need to. But it would at least make it more accessible, more condensed for the end user to apply or to read those rules. Reading rules is never really a pleasant time spent. I hardly ever reread my rules, to be honest. I try to develop them, but it is part of the whole picture. It's not just the balloon rule book and we're done. I think we need to talk to you and have better communication anyway. So, 2 areas where we did change the rule. Balloon rule book and the glider rule book is a different approach of providing rules. Another one, which I think is very important, is CS STAN, which is a document containing standard repairs and standard changes that do not need an approval from EASA or from anybody else. It gives you your responsibility back as the mechanic doing the change to an aircraft. We have so far made 2 revisions of that document, so we are including new changes into that document. And the next one is on its way. There's a new revision to CS STAN proposing new standard changes in there. You can still comment on those proposals until mid-December, and I really encourage you to do that. It's the tool for us to get feedback on, does it work, do we need something else? And apart from the revision to CS STAN, we also have clearly identified how you can make proposals, because we don't believe that this is the end of the revisions to CS STAN. There will be plenty of things that need to be changed in the future. So CS STAN, I think, is an important document, standard changes, standard repairs. There's actually a nice thought behind that, because we were looking at the AC 4313 from the FAA saying, oh, that's a good document. But actually, in our European system, we have highly qualified mechanics out there. And we, in this process, decided to use that better, use that responsibility, that knowledge, in the process of standard changes and repairs. That's why we could do this. So it's part of using the abilities and the responsibilities of our community to work on a different process.
Yeah, my job was to rattle through the rest of the regulations which we achieved, but I'm not going to read everything, since even I find that a bit boring. But I'd like to raise a few of the rules which exemplify how the new approach has really penetrated the entire rulemaking approach we've got now, and how drastic the change is. Especially since I realized that on the grassroots level, you may not be seeing the changes yet, because even though the rules are approved and to some part already in force, they're not yet necessarily implemented, which will come, but it takes a bit of time. One of the rules which actually I find one of my favorites is the air operations rule, the OPS NCO, non-commercial, non-complex, because I think that's one good example of how a rule is written to be rather common sense in many senses. It may not be, no rule is to everybody's liking, of course, but it actually has, it seems, liberalized a lot in many countries how things are done. Just to give an example, in the old system, basically, we said if you want to fly IFR with an aircraft, you pretty much have to stock your aircraft with every piece of navigation technology ever invented. The OPS NCO says, well, you need to have whatever you need to have for the route you plan to fly. The rest we're not interested in. So this means you can actually get rid of a lot of the stuff which you're not really using, which is just gathering dust. It also removed some of the national gold plating. So we used to have countries which required 2 altimeters, 2 radios, whatever. 3 cup holders, whatever, this, you know, this stuff. So we're kind of getting that through. We also done a lot of other things for IFR flying. Competence-based instrument rating was introduced after the rather heavyish old instrument rating system. Some people in the industry are saying it's already good enough, don't touch it anymore. We respectfully disagree, we're still trying to improve it. There is introduction of new GPS approaches all over on all instrument runway ends, that kind of stuff. And in the pilot training, which was already mentioned this morning, now with the declared training organizations rule, which was just published this summer, it means we can finally go back to a more flexible system where there's no prior approval, there's a self-declaration by the training provider, and you could even have these one-man shops coming back, basically to, you know, one instructor and complying with all the rules. So, and there's many other rules which are not specifically general aviation such, but basically are ingrained in a lot of the same philosophy. And I realize there's a lot of things which are, or some things which are still in the pipeline. You can see them on the red. They will be coming along. But essentially, we've got to say that we've kind of achieved, I think, 3/4 of what we set out to do.
Yeah, well, 3/4 maybe of the rulemaking activity. I don't think you'll have noticed much of the implementation yet. That is really the next phase that will come to us. I didn't want to avoid the hot potato that is in the middle, which is Part M Light. That has been a proposal that was developed by a lot of people a long time ago, has been in the Commission for a long time with discussions, but there's light at the end of the tunnel, and I think it's a positive light. So we expect that it will be put on the agenda and we'll get finally some output this year, or next year, I mean, out of the Part M Light history. It's a good example of a bad process. So I think that's one of the lessons learned I'd like to share in the end. I'm speeding up a little bit our presentation because otherwise I take too much time from my colleagues here. But a very important thing I really need to mention, which is the new basic regulation in green is really a starting point for a new way of creating a flexibility into our regulatory system. And our challenge is to move that forward into the implementing rules. Those are the 2 red boxes at the bottom right, where we also have to make sure that this flexibility that is created in the new basic regulation continues in the next level of our rules for certification. And that's one of our big challenges. If we want new aircraft, we also have to rethink our process of, okay, how do we control design? How do we control production? And not stifle innovation. So this is one of the new tasks that we are going to start to look at what the new basic regulation provides us as tools and make sure that we create something in the next level which still keeps the door open for innovation. So that is really our big rulemaking message right now is the new basic regulation recently came out and this is our next toolbox for the future. The other thing that was in blue on this slide I want to mention, in your folder is one example of a Sunny Swift comic that EASA is preparing. We have artists among the bureaucrats that can make a nice cartoon. We have colleagues who are able to translate it in all languages for Europe. It's something else than rulemaking, but I hope you understand the intent to reach out and get in contact and give more information about what we're doing. So this is one of the alternative methods that we use to get in contact, together with a GA community on our website where we want to freely communicate with everybody. Looking at the time, I'll go very quickly to, I think it's still a very important slide. I put in red and green as I see things that have happened during the GA Roadmap. Rulemaking, as I said, for the Part M Light is on the right red side. It's not always going to be the best way forward. Like Patrick asked at the beginning, it takes us 4 to 5 years to change a rule. innovation is going a lot faster than our rulemaking. So keep that in mind. If we continue just to focus on rules and changing rules, I don't think that's the way to go. We also have to identify that the individuals are important. It's not always an organization. It's the individuals who carry a responsibility and knowledge that we need to include. Don't call a one-man shop a DOA. I mean, what's the organization in this one person? The other thing is that, and I think that is what we do in the GA community side, I think we need to share more information than relying on a top-down oversight mechanism. You get far more information directly from your colleague than from an audit and a findings report. And for us as regulators, I think we need to learn, we need also to innovate our rulemaking, understanding, to look at objectives instead of trying to put in the rule how we picture that the environment looks like. That is what we have been doing, and we're still doing it partially. We have an idea what the world looks like outside, and that's what we capture in our rules. And we have to be able to stand back and look at what are we actually trying to do, because the world is changing. We cannot do it that way anymore. Last point is really that we are looking into facilitating new technology. I've put in technology for safety as one of our initiatives to look at, okay, what's happening out there and how can we get that on board. It's not a rulemaking activity, but we are looking into how can we balance the benefits of new technologies against the right-hand side, what we do today. We look at the failure assessment of systems. What can go wrong and how do we mitigate? We also want to look at what's the benefit of technology in operation. So that is one of the big things. And finally, it's a bit small at the bottom. The message is really safety together. We need to understand better what's going on. We need to explain better what we're trying to do. And I think we're on the right track with this team to move ahead for the future. I wouldn't want to miss this opportunity to thank all my colleagues in EASA. This is a picture from Aero this year. There are a number of people in the audience from EASA who have done a great job. There are also a lot of people still at home who would love to be here, but mission budget-wise, that's not allowable and not possible. But I do want to show a few faces on screen to make sure that they are recognized for their work as well. And they've been great supporters. This is from my side, the EASA side. There are far more supporters and assistants in the audience. So I'd like to thank my colleagues who are not here for their dedication and their support. And I'll hand over to my counterparts in the national authorities. They provided very nice slides to start with.
Good morning, everyone. I want to talk a little bit about what we have done, what EASA has done, what governments have done, what NAAs have done, but most importantly of all, I want to talk about what you need to do and what we need to do for the future. What's on my slides, I've only got 2 slides. They are important, but what's more important is the why behind that. So we set up a GA program, the GA Roadmap within EASA to feed down to the member states. That needed strong leadership to initiate change and maintain the momentum. In the UK, we saw that in the Government Red Tape Challenge and Challenge from Government. We saw it in the Chief Executive of the CAA. I see it on a daily basis in my director sat down in the front row, whose only challenge to me this morning as I stood up here was to make it interesting. So that I will endeavour to do. That's great for a programme and programme change discipline, but one of the big successes of the last 5 years is that programme has been taken by EASA and the member states and put in to business as usual. So we started off with a small GA task force, NAAs, users and EASA talking together at the strategic level to make sure the direction is right, that regulation is challenged to be proportionate at the highest levels. Very, very powerful. We've now moved forward. We have a GA technical body, like all the other GA technical bodies in EASA, and that is the working pattern of meetings, of challenge into it from the NAAs, of deciding the rule-making tasks. What we must be careful of now that we have that business as usual in the technical bodies is that we don't fall back into the habits of the past, where things are talked through, challenges posed, challenges responded to, and talked through again. We must maintain the pressure to drive change. I knew that we were having some success with that in the UK and throughout Europe when I stood up in front of a group of people and they were concerned about the level of change. A lot of change is challenging, but that doesn't make it bad. And there is still a lot to do in the regulation of general aviation, and we must hold that balance of a change at a level that is uncomfortable for us all, but we can drive forward. So that Jyrki doesn't have to stand up here as he did this morning and say, now that we have had our success with declared training organisations, we have got the rule set back to where it needs to be. None of you from the NAAs or the governments, none of EASA, not me, should have to stand up and say, we've had to change our rule set to get it back to where it needs to be. So we need to use this business as usual construct to make sure general aviation is regulated in the correct and proportionate way. The GA TEB has 4 objectives that we've agreed. The discussion has not been around these objectives, it's been around how we achieve those objectives and how we can coordinate at every level. And the challenge for the GA TEB members is how do they go back to their home NAA or state and explain to all those people that don't have a direct link with general aviation, who are firmly embedded in commercial air transport, that GA is different. It is special. It needs to be thought about differently. And that, we hope, that work behind those objectives, the why and the how, is what will be so important. So everybody in this room needs to go back to their association, to their NAA, to their government, whoever it is, and keep thumping the message that we need to continue to do the regulation of GA differently so that it can accept innovation, it can continue and thrive, and we can do the right things. Our work will never be over.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Andreas Winkler. I'm from Austro Control, so my home is Vienna, so it's a little bit a home game for me to have you here. I have to say thanks to be part of that great team. Yeah, it's really a pleasure to work in that team for the future for general aviation. And I try to give you now a little bit of view into the authorities, how we are thinking and we are looking into the future and what the challenges are that we really have in practice. The regulation change is just the first step. Yeah, I think the much more important step is the change of the working methods. Yeah, and that's really a challenge, as Andreas said in his presentation in the first part. Yeah, it's much easier to have a white paper than to have a lot of regulations behind and to change that. Yeah, to delete something and change something is really a big challenge for all of us. Yeah, in the working methods. What does that practically mean? Yeah. One of the big changes were from compliance to performance. Yeah? In the past, we did more or less 100% compliance to the regulation. We deeply looked in each part of the regulation to sign it off and give finally an approval. Yeah? The rules at that time, we already said that, were maybe outdated. So the regulation is not looking so much in the future as it should be. So the compliance method is not the right one for the future. We need something different, and that is the change to the performance and risk-based approach. We need much more flexibility. Yeah? We need to focus on the risks, but before that we have to look what are the risks. Yeah? So we need data, we need other methods in the authority to look at that. Yeah? And to look at things where poor performance is available, and where good performance is working, we can relax. This is a complete different way looking at it and a different way of a working method. The detailed verification, as I said, that was in the past. Yeah? The new way is the safety oversight, to look at the general aviation in a more holistic approach. Yeah? There are some very good examples, I think. Yeah? If you look at systems like collision warning systems, yeah, they are established in general aviation and they are not certified. And that was for the authorities really a big challenge. I remember really big discussions to say, this is not certified. Yeah? This is on working on a garage door frequency opener. How can that work? Yes, it works. And finally, it is an improvement in the safety. And that's our goal at the end. The management of the risk area is also something we're still struggling. Yeah? We need very good data. We need data about occurrences, about all the failures that we have to find the right methods. And we need something very new for us, yeah? Like safety promotion, supplemental measures which try to achieve our target. And the target is, of course, always safety improvement. That's our vision that we have in mind. Yeah? And certification, for example, is just one tool. We have to think different. So let's try. A good example is also the change from an approval to a declared system. Yeah? In the past, everything has been approved. Yeah? This was the first step. Now we go to declared system. Yeah? What does that mean? And the mindset is, we as an authorities, and the regulator said it, we have to trust that everything is okay. Yeah? You did a very good job. We trust it is okay, and you can immediately start to work. That's the basis of the declared system. And that is something in the brain we have to change. Yeah? As a follow-up, of course, we have all the measures as an authority, and that's a different way, a different behavior of an authority for the future. What are the examples of that? I think if you look at that maintenance program, in the past, any airplane, a sailplane, a balloon, a light airplane, has to have an approved maintenance program. This was a lot of work in the authorities. Yeah? We have a lot of inspectors working on that, and it was very clear this is important. And now we change it to a system that the owner can declare his maintenance program, including extensions of TBOs. Yeah? This is a very big step for us. Yeah? And a very big step in the change of the workmanship in that what we did in the past. The same with training organizations. Yeah? With a DTO, the Declared Training Organization, there's no initial approval required. You can quickly start to work on that. Standard changes, already mentioned. Yeah? We find ways that not everything has to be certified. Yeah? Under certain conditions, you can install things without any approval. This is really a big step. And of course, the basic regulation that opens the door, as Boudewijn said, for the future, yeah? For maybe declared system design, something which was not possible and not a vision up to now, but that opens really the door. But it was very clear this process is not so easy. That needs a kind of change management behind that on both sides. For the authorities, yeah, we have to change that from a check control to a promote and monitor system. That needs definitely a training, yeah? Person did a job for decades of years in one way, and now they cannot change it from one day to the other. So we need acceptance, a training for inspectors and personnel in the authorities, yeah? And we have a very new area, safety promotion, something which we are not trained. We are not expert in that. And we have to find ways to do that. And that's part of our job now. But on the other hand, and I think that's more important maybe as the authorities, the user and applicant have to think different. They have to understand that new regulations. Sometimes they are really complex and not easy to understand. So they need also a kind of training and promoting what is the intention of the rule, what is the mindset. There need to be a kind of self-controlling, yeah? Are we already in line with the regulation, with the ideas behind it? A good example is that declaration, yeah? That does not mean do nothing, yeah? It just says, yes, we will follow the regulation. Otherwise, we as the authority cannot trust you behind that. And that is, I think, the basis of this big change. So finally, I think we have definitely changed our direction of flight, importantly changed it. But we are still in the progress on there, and we are not landed finally. But we are in a really very good way. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Michael Erb. I'm the chairman of the European AOPAs and the chairman of the EASA General Aviation Committee. And if you have carefully listened to the speakers from the authorities, then you will not be surprised by anything I've got to say, what I've got to say today. So it's already a very good signal that the colleagues from the authorities have apparently understood what the general aviation sector needs, and so that's already some good progress. But nevertheless, I want to explain a little bit from our association angle what we are doing and what our role in the GA roadmap process is. Well, when our relations started, EASA was a relatively young but very successful regulator. It certified the Airbus A380, and it made the airline operation significantly safer. And they just tried to apply the same methods to make general aviation safer as in the airline world. And when we told them we don't have so many organizations where you can have a management system for everything, I think that was just what they expected, a typical, we don't like it, you are over-regulating us, and they gave it a try. Our relation at the beginning was a very challenging or frustrating one. And after the costs went up for flight training, when we had the ATO concept, and when the cost for maintenance went up with the CAMO, the maintenance organizations, then we had a couple of national authorities taking the lead in criticizing the system and making some constructive recommendations, and this is how the General Aviation Roadmap was born. And so we had this event in Rome, which was really a game changer, and as Patrick Key is safeguarding this GA roadmap, we really could achieve some progress. And well, we as the GA stakeholders, we are, let's say, the interface between EASA and thousands of individuals, passionate aviators in our industry. And we provide EASA with information, and we provide our members with information. So we participate in rulemaking activities, and we have the General Aviation Committee where more than 20 associations are represented, and Julian and I are having the pleasure to chair this group, and we are also meeting with the national authorities. We are having joint meetings because it showed that the earlier we meet and work together on the same issues, the better the result will be. And here you see it's the associations, it's the national aviation authorities and EASA working together as project teams. And I think it's fair to say that even the airline industry envies us a little bit that we are talking directly together with the national authorities, and they aren't doing this yet. Is the world perfect? Not yet. If you ever believe in something like a perfect world, of course, there's always something that can be criticized. And Patrick already mentioned it, the processes are too slow. The part in light, we were informed, will be ready finally after, I think, 6 or 7 years after its first steps. We'll get it finally in February. Let's hope that this will really the final date. And it's hard to tell the people in the industry to be calm, to be patient. We associations are talking with the EASA and the Commission. It will come very soon, but then for 3 years nothing really happens, at least nothing that which we can see that it's any progress made, and this is sometimes still frustrating. Another issue is that implementation on the national level is still a challenge. We got on the podium the representatives from Austria and the UK, and there are definitely shining examples of how the rules should be implemented. There are some other states having more difficulties, and also a role that we are taking up. Boudewijn and I were together already, I will not say where we were earlier this year, and trying to speak in a country and to inform the authorities about what's coming on the GA roadmap. And they told us very clearly they never heard about this, and they don't like it, and they want to file an exemption. It's a disaster we dislike. And I think this was, for all of us, kind of an eye-opener, and so we need to work on this. And there's also some good news in this respect. The new Article 62 of the basic regulation, which was just published in September. You will not know it by heart, just like me, but if you go to Article 62, number 11, there EASA has a new function in the process. Whenever somebody feels disadvantaged by the national implementation of a European rule, they can now directly contact EASA as the spiritual master of this rule, which was not foreseen before. So a lot of additional work you'll have to do. But I think it's very important. If we agree on European rules, then we need to implement them in a coherent way. And also something personal, which I would like to say, well, there are a lot of ongoing discussions about if Europe still makes sense or not. But, well, if we in aviation cannot agree on European-wide rules, where when you fly straight and level for 10 minutes, it's quite likely that you will be in another member state's airspace, then you shouldn't even try to speak about the European market and financial system. So we must make this a success, and I think we are already, with our European system, much, much better than the national systems were in the past. And last slide. I think we are all complaining about the lack of data and the lack of statistics, and it's a problem already that the member states don't report the number of pilots to the EU. They are not, in some cases, aware how many general aviation aircraft they have on their register. It's quite difficult to do a rule-making impact assessment if you don't know how many aircraft are out there, how many pilots, and how many hours they fly. And we want to provide some information via a survey which we run together in cooperation with other associations too. And if you inform your colleagues to participate in that and invite them, it takes some 10 minutes time. And so far we already got about 3% of the operators of motor-powered GA aircraft in Europe participating in that. And so that's also how we work together with the European institutions. Of course, we also have a wish list. I don't know if I should read it down, but to give you an idea what we would like to see in the future. In the Roadmap 2.0, of course, there's licensing issues. In some states worldwide, there's work done on the medical standards, which are still a little bit of the astronaut style here in Europe. I think there something could be done. Also, the gap between the microlights and our certified aircraft world, we need to work on that, that we make it easier to transition from one side to the other. Then there's opportunities to make flying safer by connecting our aircraft, to give them traffic information, to avoid mid-air collisions, to give them weather information and AIS information. That's possible nowadays already in other parts of the world, whereas we don't have that over here. That's been my introduction. I thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Julian Scarfe from Europe Airsports. As you've seen, we've come a long way since we met together in Rome 4 years ago. I'd like to highlight some of the challenges that we faced on that journey, identify examples of the achievements associated with overcoming those challenges, but also caution on the corresponding difficulties on the road ahead. I'll talk about 3 topics briefly, I hope. So one key challenge is the legal framework in which rulemaking takes place. We have a GA roadmap, a plan. We have an aspiration for simpler, lighter, better rules for general aviation. But any changes that we make has to take place within a legal framework. And for the first 5 years of the GA project, we've been working under a basic regulation that has really hampered progress by limiting the flexibility of the rules that we have. So, for example, we spent a lot of time arguing about whether or not the basic regulation even allows training outside an approved training organisation, about whether EASA is allowed to craft means of compliance that are proportionate for low-risk organisations, and we've been working under the constraint that many components used in aviation have to be certified, regardless of the value of that certification in the overall safety management process. But earlier this year, after a lot of hard work by many people at EASA, at the Commission, national authorities and stakeholder groups, we saw the publication of the new basic regulation. And there is huge opportunity offered by this new legislation. For example, it embodies some of the key principles, Jyrki mentioned one earlier, of the GA project into the principles of the basic regulation. It offers a great deal more flexibility in certification and approval requirements in the implementing rules, and it offers a real opportunity for sports and recreational organisations to become qualified entities supporting the national authorities in the safety regulation process. And we're looking forward to breaking free from the chains that have bound us in with this previous basic regulation. However, the new basic regulation only provides a framework for regulation, and large sections of the bad old rules that led to suboptimal safety are, unfortunately, still in place. Over the last 2 years, progress in adoption of new rules, in the case of GA, those are simpler, better, and lighter rules, has slowed to a crawl. And we're told that this is due to resource limitations in the Commission. Going forward, I think the challenge for the Commission is in demonstrating to those that its legislation protects that it is serious about making better rules on a reasonable timescale, and that it has some outcome focus to its activities, and that it's with us on the journey to improve the overall safety performance of the civil aviation sector as the new basic regulation demands. A second challenge through the GA roadmap has been communicating and implementing risk-based regulation. If you step back from the detail of regulation and you look at safety management in perspective, it's obvious that the way to optimize safety is to focus on the biggest risks. In other words, we want to build a safety chain that looks like this, not one that looks like this, where we've put the steel in the wrong place. One significant achievement over the last few years is the development of the European Plan for Aviation Safety and the work programme around it. When I first started working with EASA almost a decade ago, the programme was a spreadsheet of rules to be made without a strategic concept for why those rules were necessary. Now we see a proper planning system in the Strategy and Safety Management Directorate, and I'm sure those who have contributed to the development of the most recent plans and programmes will join me in saying that they are not perfect, but they are the beginning of a journey towards a regulatory system that really puts safety first. Also in the GA project, we've had an initiative called Technology for Safety that is designed to make the most of what technologies can do to improve safety in GA. Technologies that you'll come across in some of the later panels, like navigation solutions and solutions for electronic conspicuity. One of the principles developed in this initiative is the net safety benefit approach. When introducing new technology, it's tempting for a regulator to look only at the new risks that the new technology brings. But a rational safety manager must also look at the benefit that the technology brings to safety. If we don't, we end up piling extra rules and regulations on something that can improve overall safety. And the net result is that the overall safety performance is lower, because that technology is not allowed to deliver the benefits that it has potential to bring. While net safety benefit is easy to like in principle, we have had some persistent problems in practice. Massimo doesn't like the principle very much. You might remember Massimo. Massimo was the guy that I introduced you to in Rome. He's the day-to-day decision maker. He's concerned with his link in the safety chain, the one that he's building. And he wants, with the best intentions, he's a good guy, with the best intentions for his link to be as strong as possible. At the back of his mind, perhaps, is fear of being blamed if it's his link that breaks. What he doesn't see is the effect of putting all the steel into his link in the chain and the effect that that has on the other links of the chain. And so in aviation safety, I still occasionally see resource being directed at the wrong risks. All of the decisions that are being made in misdirecting the resource are well-intentioned. Some of them are made in Cologne, some of them are made in national authorities, some of them are even made at ICAO in Montreal. And everybody wants their link in the chain to be strong. But the consequence is that we lose the net safety benefit. The final challenge that I'd like to mention is the simplicity of regulation. It's right there in the simpler, lighter, better rules for general aviation. But we still have some very complex rules. The example that is easy to bring up is the easy access set of rules for flight crew licensing. It's a mere 1,300 pages long. But actually, simplicity is not about word count in regulation, nor necessarily about how many regulations there are. It's about reducing regulation to the minimum concept required to achieve the safety intent. And we've made good progress with the sailplane rulebook and the balloon rulebook in taking parts of the operations and pilot licensing rules that affect glider and balloon pilots and putting them in dedicated volumes. And by looking at the rules from a fresh perspective, it should be possible to simplify them back to the minimum concept required to keep operations safe enough. But the way we make rules is not set up for simplicity. We identify a particular issue and put it in front of a group of subject matter experts. They are experts on the issue that they've been asked to address, and we ask them to make rules or fix the problem. And they fixate on their issue and the concentrated benefits that the additional rules create. But they're not able to balance that against the overall cost of the complexity that those rules bring, because those costs are very diffuse. The result is maybe a new rating, a new requirement, a new type of organization, or a new responsibility for an already overloaded stakeholder without taking away any of the existing responsibilities or rules. It's very much like Massimo's influence again, not seeing the big picture. But unless we look at the rule set as a whole and reduce it to the minimum required to achieve the safety goal, we will forever be buried in the complexity that is itself a hazard to aviation safety. And we must not be afraid to challenge the orthodoxies of our aviation past and to change the mindset to what is needed only to address the main risks. So we've made a great deal of progress over the last few years, and we've gone a long way towards achieving simpler, better, and lighter rules for general aviation. But to succeed going forward, we need to be strategic, we need to be bold, and we need to be smart about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you, everyone who's given a chat today. Most informative, and I think for those of us who've been around in aviation for a while, which looking out there seems to be most of us, there's been a sea change in the attitude both at many of the national aviation authorities and at EASA, and unfortunately at the user end of that, at the grassroots, most of those people are still living under previous regulatory regimes, and the change, while it's coming, it takes a little while to gain, and we all know how conservative we can all be and how we fix our view of something at a time. And I think it was quite interesting as Patrick was talking about the gestation period, effectively, of a regulation at EASA being somewhere between 4 and 5 years. And I'm guessing that the conception of that is not that much fun either. But so for all of us in this room, things tend to take a lot longer than we would really like. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's a commercial airline pilot and owns a couple of General Aviation aircraft, so well engaged in the world of aviation. And she said, EASA, doesn't that stand for every afternoon something alters? Unfortunately, it doesn't, because clearly it doesn't. But there is a perception out there. I think we have a huge number of the more complex regulations that Julian was talking about that take a little bit of disseminating and percolating down. So I see that the slide is now up and we're ready for the question. This is the first time I've seen this, so I'm guessing the way this works is that Diego's question seems to be the most popular. So how can EASA get more involved in the implementation of the new regulation in each country? As you know, it's not coordinated in time or interpretation, something which... so Tony, how do you approach that?
It's a difficult balance to strike because the very construct of the EU and EASA leaves a lot of the authority and the responsibility with the member states, and that is the political construct that has been set up. What we've shown in the last 5 years is where member states, EASA and stakeholders work together, you can achieve a better result as quickly as possible. So absolutely right to encourage EASA and everybody else to help with implementations. Really great if larger states can help smaller states, more developed states help those with smaller resources, and there are ways of doing that. Being open to that challenge and recognising there's a different way to do it is a good starting point. But it all comes down to resource, which we all struggle with, so we have to do the best with what we have.
A quick question for Boudewijn, a bit of a follow-up from that. I'm guessing, perhaps you can include this in there as well. The Article 62.11 will presumably start to bring that to the fore. Will that help?
Yeah, it slightly does. Works this mic? Still a team, that's good. I think it's important you can continue to look at this in the hierarchy of EASA, national authorities, stakeholders. But I think a very important issue for the future is we need a horizontal communication between all of us. We can point at, so what's the NAA going to do, and let's see how they interface with the stakeholders. I think that's not the solution for all of us. So also that Article 62 is maybe the legal stick behind that can force us, but I think it's more important that we understand that if we share information directly, and this is where actually the GA community website is a good tool. If we have issues and we can jointly discuss that, I think that's a far better option than saying, okay, what's the NAA going to do? Tell me, Tony. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I see the next question from Florian. Is it still proportionate that CPL theory, well, there you go, CPL theory is required for a flight instructor for PPR? I think we all know that there's a European-wide shortage of instructors, and this may be a way of improving it. Michael?
It's an issue that we are discussing for a while, and I think we just discussed it at our last meeting of General Aviation Task Force. Indeed, we are running short of flight instructors, and the CPL theory as it is today is too much of a burden. There's 2 ways now that are being discussed how to change this. Either to introduce something like competency-based CPL theory for operations like flight instructing or parachute dropping or sightseeing flights, something like that, or to completely give up the CPL requirement. But then we would have a little problem with ICAO, which requires the flight instructors to hold the CPL. But this could be overcome by the member states filing exemptions with ICAO. So we have this on the screen. It has a high priority, but maybe the colleagues would like to say something.
So I think the answer to the question is really simple. The answer is no, it's not. The more difficult bit is how do you get that change? And this is going to be a really good test case of the resolve of EASA member states and stakeholders to deliver a change that is needed. This was discussed at the last GA Technical Advisory Body, and everybody in the room agreed there was a problem. EASA are up for getting it into a rulemaking task and pushing forward as quickly as possible. Member states are saying, we feel uncomfortable about finding differences to ICAO, so we're going to have to look at all that. It is, on the face of it, a very simple thing that is going to be quite difficult to deliver. But we've started that process already, and let's hope it's not another 4 or 5 years. Everybody is doing their best to drive this quicker, but it will need some tough decisions to do the right evidence-based thing.
It would be great if we don't end up with a system where you can do it in some countries and you can't do it in other countries, and if you did some of your licence in one country with an instructor who... Not that would ever happen, clearly, but just in case. Jyrki, I think this is a question for you from Pete Stratton. So, yeah. How will the Commission... basically, how's the Commission going to put its finger out and help us get things done?
I'll refrain from saying what I'm thinking. Well, actually, we realized there has been in the last couple of years, there has been a problem, there's been a bottleneck on the Commission side on getting rules through. Not because my colleagues wouldn't have been working, but it's mainly a resource issue. The good news actually is that the bottleneck has been either widened or broken off at the moment. I think there's a bit of shards on the floor, so it may be broken off. Basically, we have a 100% increase in the resources in the legal review, which is something we need to absolutely do. That means one person left, 2 new people came in, and since the 2 new people don't know what's impossible, things started moving. So actually, if you look in the last 6 months, we've passed a huge amount of rules in just a couple of months. And I think the situation is clearly improving. The trouble, of course, being that we need to work through the backlog of various rules. I mean, we cleared most of the opinions which EASA has produced, but there's more in the pipeline.
Thank you. So you're working on it.
We worked on it already.
and we'll see the results real soon now.
Well, you've already seen many of them. Actually, if you followed the PUT DTO and MED and the sailplane book and whatnot, which we've passed in a couple of months preceding this.
Good pushback. I'm looking forward to Part M Light. Thank you.
February.
Excellent. Andreas, perhaps you'd like to talk about the next one and how you might, as an NAA, address this. I mean, the question is, as you can all read, I guess it's relating to those countries where general aviation is playing a smaller part and is less active, and so the regulations perhaps don't have someone in their national aviation authority who focuses on delivering them in the simplest, lightest way possible.
I think it's a very sensitive area that we have, because we in Europe have a different culture and even we have different languages. So this is an issue where we definitely need the help of the national authorities. It will not only work with that. So we may specifically go to that countries, actively, maybe more actively going to that countries, delivering the vision that we have, and they have to follow that and make safety promotion or other methods in their country to the right way, adopted to their country needs, So that needs definitely a good plan to do that.
Boudewijn, is there anything you want to add to that from a EASA point of view?
Yeah, I think it's important, and actually Michael App already gave you an example. We are already engaging in road shows. That was one of the blue chemical elements on my slide. We try to organize meetings with the national authorities and the local stakeholders in the language of the country, if we can, to explain what's coming and to get in touch with our community. And I think that's one of the powerful tools. And it's not just that we, as EASA GA Roadmap, we are organizing roadshows. We try to come to existing events and join you there. We cannot organize all these roadshows from start to finish, but we are definitely trying to help. We have had very successful roadshows in Spain and what else, and We even were able to bring EASA colleagues who are fluent or fluent enough in those languages to bring the message to the people as straightforward as possible. So that's what we continue to do. We try to support existing events and share the information.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you to keep the microphone and move on to the next question, which is, I guess, largely about a merging of FCL databases and whether that's within your plans or not.
That's a good question. It's a bit out of my league, to be honest.
Is that for Dominic or Patrick?
The answer is yes.
The answer is yes.
Okay. That's a non-diplomatic but straight answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Florian. Could EASA establish an auditing system? I love this democracy of questions. It's great, isn't it? Could EASA establish an auditing system on the implementation of GA Roadmap by the national, except for when it moves when you're reading it? Where's it gone? Top. Could EASA establish an auditing system on the implementation of GA Roadmap by the NAAs? So that's back to the question of those, because clearly every NAA in this room is currently really good and doing everything properly, but I suppose there may be some who aren't.
Well, we have a system in place, of course. I
should have said an effective system, sorry.
That's a very, very unkind change to the question, no. No, we have a system in place, but I'm not sure if that system is sufficient for the future. There's so many changes coming, and especially if the new rules will be implemented, we need support. I'm not sure if an auditing system is the right tool to implement and support this. We need to educate, we need to get feedback. It's a direct exchange of information. Again, I'll fall back to my previous comment. I don't think a hierarchy where we are the police looking after the NAAs, doing auditing systems is the best way forward. It's definitely not the way how I brought up my children. I think explaining what we're trying to achieve is far more helpful than raising findings and doing paperwork. So I think an auditing system is on top of what we're doing already, not really to be expected. Yeah,
thank you. I'd like to pass on to Julian now, which is basically, I guess, talking about the primacy of EU law and part NCO, and whether the Jyrki thought it was heading his way.
Do you want to go first? No, I'll see what you answer. Then I'll
well, I'm not a lawyer, but I wanted to give you an example of an occasion where we've managed to overcome some problems with differences between national regulation and part NCO. You'll hear more about it in a later panel, but that's around flight sharing platforms and cost sharing via flight sharing platforms, which are allowed under NCO. We did have a member state that imposed some additional rules on that. EASA formed a safety action group where we got to discuss the issue from a risk-based point of view. And I think those additional rules have now been withdrawn, and we're all on the same page again across Europe on flight sharing platforms. So that's an example of how the EASA system has worked well in resolving differences between different member states on issues around operations. Do you want to add something, Jyrki?
Well, no, I mean, basically, that's a good example of how things worked well in the end. The basic rule, of course, is that EU law always prevails, since we're doing directly applicable regulations. But I realize that there is still a problem that the people on the ground, basically, they're faced with if the local authority says something else, they're faced with that authority, and that authority is the one doing the enforcement. So we need to know of the problems first before we can do something. And we don't necessarily come in with the sirens blaring, but rather we try to talk to the authority and find out if there's a misunderstanding or something else in place. So it's not like an American movie, it's more like boring bureaucrats work.
Thank you. I'm going to just jump one quick question to bring Michael in for a second. So a question about how can I, as a member of the GA community, influence GA stakeholder opinion? I think, Michael, that's pretty much right up your street.
It's like in politics, if you want to have something changed, you can either talk to a politician or become a politician. So you can talk with your associations. We can start during the coffee break, or you can write a letter. And if you want to, you can apply to become a member of a General Aviation association. There's many ways how you can do that. So from very easy solutions to very time-consuming...
Spend the rest of your life solutions.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, in short, get engaged. Boudewijn?
Yeah, I think there's also the formal processes that people can participate in developing these opinions. So we have groups, we try to share information. Especially in GA, we try to use a more flexible rulemaking process where we organize workshops to talk directly to our stakeholders when we are developing something. And that is the way how we can also get your feedback directly into the opinions that we're developing. So the formal way is very often we publish a proposal and you can make comments to that. A more active approach is probably what we'll need more frequently. And that is talk to you in a workshop directly on our thoughts, our directions in developing an opinion. So that is where you definitely can get in contact and get your influence in the process.
May I add? I think there's an important word in that. That's GA community. Yeah. If you look at that, yeah, I'm still missing the industry. Yeah, the industry are part of the community, not only the users. Yeah, so we have the industry like very small organization. We have thousands of small organizations within EU, and they have to be speaking in one force together. And I think this is also, let's say, motivation to these industry groups to work together to find a way to speak with one voice to us, to national authorities, and of course to EASA, and form that. Yeah, so I have the feeling that really that is necessary, that the GA community will be stronger in that case, and especially in the industry case, manufacturing organizations, maintenance organizations, all that small organizations that we have.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the many hundreds, if not thousands, of GA businesses and communities don't, or rarely see things in the same way, which makes the message slightly tricky. Perhaps you could pass the microphone back to Boudewijn for a second. Patrick mentioned about the 4.5-year gestation period, roughly. Yeah, under the basic regulation, you need to adapt things within 2 years. How's that going to happen?
That refers to one of the, or actually to those red boxes on the slide that I presented. We have started, or we have actually continued one of the missing elements on the new structure that we need for the basic regulation, and that's really the certification side of GA, where production and design are still not restructured using the new basic regulation tools that we have. Our plan is that we have started on this activity. The plan is that we will, and this is what the article says, we are aiming to have an opinion out there in 2 years' time. But the end result is, I think, in the end, more important than the deadline. So we definitely want to get in touch with the community to see how we can reshape the initial airworthiness regulatory side, how we can use qualified entities in that process. It's going to be quite a challenge, really. And we have to consider that not just looking back at how we've done things and how it should be done better, we also have to look forward in time saying, okay, what's coming our way? Because we don't want to continue changing the rules. We need to find better ways of embedding the safety objectives into our rules. But to come short to the question, yes, we are aiming at an opinion or opinions, the other one is the FCL, to accommodate the changes from the new basic regulation into the initial airworthiness side. So that's definitely our aim. We'll see in the coming 2 years how successful we are. But Dominic would like to make an additional statement.
Yes, maybe to back to the question, because it gives the impression that it's a challenge to produce an opinion within 2 years, but we already did that. The part-time light opinion was released within less than 2 years. The same with the Part 66. When we mentioned that the full rulemaking process is taking 4 to 5 years, it is the opinion plus the time of consultation by the internal service of the Commission, plus the voting by the Parliament, the Council. So it's the overall rulemaking process. So the opinion is just one phase in the rulemaking process.
Yeah, I think what I would say, just as a little bit of input, from the end user point of view, the system is the system, and the end user doesn't really differentiate between EASA, the Commission, and often even the National Aviation Authority. It's really just the rules, and we see it. We understand, or I understand that it isn't, but that's how it tends to be seen.
Maybe one point on this one, because we also understand that it takes years before a new rule is really adopted and published, and especially in this one where the initial airworthiness is a big issue. If you look at production organizations, they struggle to get an approval. This new task is aiming to get a new concept out in an opinion in 2 years' time. And then you get the other years of trying to adopt this. In the meantime, we cannot leave you alone by saying, well, good luck, wait for the finish line, which is in 5 years. So in the meantime, we have developed new material within the constraints of the current rules, but trying to create more flexibility in that respect. And that has just gone last week to our advisory bodies, and we're trying to accelerate that process to make sure that you have, even within the current system, more flexibility, more choices in the way how we implement it. So there's new means of compliance and guidance material coming for small companies that at least will help to start a discussion and develop something with the constraints of the current rules.
Okay, I'm going to just skip a couple of questions here. Please forgive me. The first one about language proficiency. I think we've had quite a lot on the various ways that stuff's applied in different member states. But I just want to skip to Martin's question, if I can, and maybe ask Tony to have a look at that, which is... Oh, it's moved again. There you go. So how does the EASA plan to assess risk? But more importantly, perhaps, how do we all assess risk?
So this is really quite difficult. So you need to be clear at the starting point that there is a difference between commercial air transport, where the journey is the means to the end, and you buy a ticket and you want to get to your business meeting, your holiday or whatever, and where you're taking part in a recreational activity or it's your own personal transport. And actually the hierarchy of risk that EASA uses is actually quite helpful with that, but that's more challenging when you come to member states. It's very challenging when some of the information you're getting is counterintuitive. Julian mentioned the cost-sharing platforms. In the UK, for national licences, we have a medical declaration system, which the evidence shows is safe enough. Other member states don't share the same view. So that hierarchy of risk that starts with commercial air transport at the top is very, very important, but it has recreational activity. Those that are exposing themselves to the risk and can choose whether or not to take that risk at the bottom. That doesn't mean you don't do anything, but you approach it differently. But I come back to what I said. You have to challenge your thinking if you're going to write proportionate rules, and a lot of it can be counterintuitive. So it starts with us in this room, it starts with the rule-making groups and everything else to challenge themselves all along and be clear, general aviation is not the same as commercial air transport. Can I help?
Yep, thank you very much. Can I just check, the question on UAVs, is that probably going to be handled better later in the conference? Or is that something which will fit into this?
Well, I think in the panel we're looking back at what we achieved, and we achieved 0 on that level.
So perhaps I could ask Julian to give us a quick opinion on the pragmatism versus rulemaking and how you think that might be better balanced.
I think that a lot has been done in terms of safety promotion. We now have a safety promotion network, which is a pragmatic approach to improving safety rather than simply hoping that different rules or more rules will improve safety. That doesn't mean that we don't need rulemaking at all. We don't at the moment have an optimal set of rules. Many of the rules are actually too heavy at the moment, and we still have to continue on the rulemaking process to create simpler, better, and lighter rules. In that environment, we can make even more efficient use of safety promotion resources. So I've really appreciated the shift over the last few years from a purely rulemaking role to a more pragmatic and holistic role that the agency has taken. But they're different tools in the same toolbox.
Thank you. Okay, so we're beginning to run out of time, and we do need to have a little quick summing up. So I'm going to ask someone on the panel if we can just answer the question about emission regulations very simply. Is there anything currently planned? Boudewijn? Anyone? Jyrki? Do you have any future regulations on emissions planned?
As far as I know, there's nothing planned in that respect. I do know that we have an interesting challenge if we start to try and measure noise on electric aircraft. It doesn't seem to work. We're not measuring anything. I mean, the noise levels are very low. So the business is changing.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And where we operate is also changing. So it's we don't have anything right now planned. We have our ICAO levels, and that's what we have.
Okay.
If I may add to that, indeed, this was discussed, well, the idea of environmental regulations was discussed at length during the new basic regulation development, and basically the member states preferred to stick to the ICAO baseline, which admittedly is not terribly high. Then again, you have to see that looking at societally, the amount of GA emissions is perhaps not the biggest problem. I'm feeling guilty every time I turn the car key, but not necessarily in the aircraft.
The airplane key. Okay, thank you. Okay, lastly, quick summing up. I'm going to ask each of you for one simple item. What's the takeaway from this panel and from what we've been talking about that you would give to the audience before we wrap up? Starting with you, Boudewijn. A short takeaway.
I'll keep it very short. One of the obvious takeaways is the teamwork that we have established is, I think, our most important tool for the future. The other one which I would like to highlight is there was one hidden element in the presentation. You saw how long rulemaking takes. In the meantime, we are on the 3rd revision of CS10. So that goes a lot quicker. And that is something to keep in mind. There are other options in our system that do work fairly fast. It's the EASA decisions that can make a change in a shorter time period. So keep that in mind if we look at the changing future. Changing rules is not fast enough.
Okay, and for everyone else, keep it prompt. There's 300 hungry people here.
Okay, for me, the most important thing is the change in our on the risk-based side. So I'm really frustrated if I see if we're working on some small things have no safety benefit. On the other side, we have really accidents where we do not work on the root cause. So that's the change I like to see, that we work on the really safety issues.
Thank you. Tony?
Get involved, whether you're that individual community member responding to a consultation or joining an association that is engaged in rulemaking, get involved. If you're an NAA, if you're a member of a TEB, get involved actively in it and keep pushing forward and challenging all the time.
Thank you. Jyrki?
Tony took mine. Basically, if you're one of those people in the hangar complaining about how the authority is stupid, try doing it yourself. Come join us and improve the authority for yourself.
Thank you. Michael?
Well, in aviation, we've got this priority list in case of an emergency, aviate, navigate, communicate. But here I think we need to communicate more, and especially the member states and the European institutions, I think they need to play together much better. There are some examples that are already showing how it works.
Thank you. And lastly, Julian?
I couldn't put it better than that myself. The communication is absolutely key. Where we've communicated well in the process, we've achieved good results. Most of the problems have come from poor communication. So please talk to people about the GA project, the GA Roadmap, and help us to achieve things by working together.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your questions. Thank you, panel, and bon appétit.